Good afternoon, everyone. This is Jeff Rumberg. I'm a managing partner with MetricNet, and I will be your host for today's webcast on Help Desk Key Performance Indicators. I want to welcome all of you, and thank you for participating in the webcast today. Before we get started, I've got just a few administrative announcements to make. During the presentation, all of you will be in listen-only mode. However, if you have any questions during the webcast, you can type them in the dialog box that appears in the lower right corner of your screen. That will pause once during the presentation to answer questions. Additionally, I will remain on the webcast at the conclusion of the presentation to answer any final questions that you might have or that I did not get to during the first Q&A break. Presentation usually lasts about an hour and a half. So for those of you who have other commitments later in the day, I should be wrapped up by about 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Finally, just a quick word about MetricNet before we get started. I see that quite a few of our existing clients have joined us on the webcast today. But for those who have not worked with us before, let me give you just a brief introduction. MetricNet's core business is benchmarking. We perform benchmarks for a variety of industries and functional areas and complete more than 300 benchmarks a year. My role in the company, along with that of Eric Zipkowski, who many of you have met, is to manage the help desk, call center, desktop support, and customer satisfaction benchmarking practices. The work we do for help desks really spans the gambit from benchmarking and best practice assessments to consolidation studies and outsourcing analyses. Typically, the help desks that we work with are looking to optimize their performance, and we help them achieve those objectives through benchmarking and customer satisfaction analysis. By the way, we use the term help desk throughout the webcast, despite the fact that many, in fact most of you, run a service desk according to the ITIL definition. We're of course aware of the differences between a service desk and a help desk, but for the sake of consistency and simplicity, we use the help desk terminology throughout. One final note, and this is particularly important for those who wish to receive a copy of today's presentation. When you exit the webcast, a brief survey will pop up on your screen. Please be aware that only those who complete the survey will receive a copy of the presentation. This survey provides us with valuable feedback on the webcast. It's only 2 questions long, and it literally takes less than 10 seconds to complete. So if you do us a favor and answer that survey at the end of the webcast, I'd be very grateful. And in return for that courtesy, I'll send you a copy of today's presentation. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Now, if you have any difficulties at all during the webcast, you can reach us at the following email address, that is info@metricnet.com, or you can call us in the United States. Almost half of you are dialing in from other countries. You can call us in the United States at the following number, 202-321-5760. Again, if you have any difficulty with the video portion of today's webcast, please call us or send us an email. We've got people standing by that can help you and get you back into the webcast. Now, as we get started, it's worth commenting on why MetricNet has developed a best practices presentation on the subject of key performance indicators. And it's really quite simple. There's a very strong correlation between help desks that have a strong measurement discipline and help desks that are world-class. Now, another way of putting this is that I've never seen a world-class help desk that did not have a strong performance measurement and management discipline. Conversely, help desks that have a strong measurement discipline are almost inevitably world-class. There's a one-to-one relationship between a strong performance measurement and management discipline and being world-class. Now, if you want to have a world-class help desk, the quickest and most efficient way to get there is to pay attention to performance measurement and management. At least 80%, let me repeat that, at least 80% of what it takes to become a world-class help desk is linked to your ability to measure and manage your performance effectively. Now, to set the stage for the discussion to come, let me quickly discuss some of the most common key performance indicators. There are 28 KPIs shown on this page, and we've organized them into the categories shown. We've got cost indicators, quality metrics, productivity metrics, agent metrics, service level metrics, and call handling, sometimes called contact handling metrics, because increasingly contacts are handled through chat, email, and other channels. Now, these are among the most common key performance indicators, but they are certainly not all-inclusive. In fact, there are literally hundreds of key performance indicators, but these are among the most common. Unfortunately, what we see all too often in this industry is that help desks collect a lot of data. They track a lot of key performance indicators. Unfortunately, they don't do much with those KPIs. They don't do much analysis. And if you're not analyzing those key performance indicators, it's difficult to gain much insight from them. And if you're not gaining insight from your measurements, chances are you're not going to act on them. You're never going to undertake the managerial actions informed by key performance indicators that will enable you to improve your performance over time and ultimately achieve world-class performance. But data by itself is worthless unless you're willing to act on it. In fact, I illustrate this concept graphically on the next page. The historical approach to key performance indicators said, in effect, you should track anything and everything you possibly can. But there wasn't much focus on the analysis piece of that, and as a result, the prescription, action planning, if you will, was weak, and ultimately, very few organizations would act on the measurements that they were tracking. This is, in fact, the historical approach to managing key performance indicators. But as you can see from the red arrow here, the value increases as you move up the pyramid. The actions that you take are more important than the action plan. And the action plan is more important than the analysis that you do, and the analysis, in turn, is more important than the measurement. So what we've seen emerge in the last 3 to 5 years is a different approach to managing key performance indicators. We call it the holistic approach. It turns this pyramid upside down, and it says, in effect, that it's not so much about the measurement. In fact, when it comes to key performance indicators, less is more, as you will shortly see. So they de-emphasize the measurement piece of this, and they emphasize the analysis more so, the prescription or action planning even more so, and ultimately what world-class service desks and help desks are trying to do is take these measurements and turn them into actionable insights that will enable them to improve their performance over time and ultimately achieve a world-class level of performance. So that brings us to the central question of today's webcast. How can we turn help desk KPIs into a competitive advantage? Or more specifically, how can we leverage key performance indicators to achieve world-class performance in our help desk? Better, faster, cheaper. You've heard that. You probably think it's a cliche. But the reality is these 3 words represent the 3 dimensions of competition. Better refers to better quality. Faster means quicker cycle times. Cheaper, of course, means more efficient, lower cost. Those are the only 3 dimensions on which you can compete. You can compete on quality. You can compete on speed. You can compete on cost. So better, faster, cheaper is not just a cliche. It's not just a nice saying. It's accurate. Turning KPIs into a competitive advantage does mean that in the long run, you will have a support desk, a service desk, a help desk that is better, that is faster, that is cheaper. Now, since I brought up the term world-class, let me define what I mean by that. There's 4 components of a world-class help desk. The first is that you have high quality, and that results in high levels of customer satisfaction. But being high quality, that is having high levels of customer satisfaction, is by itself not enough. You also have to manage your costs aggressively. So what we look at is a cost per contact that is below average, and we also look at low TCO, total cost of ownership and support. And I'm going to show you how to measure that a little bit further in this presentation. There's a metric called first level resolution, different than first contact resolution. First level resolution is a proxy for total cost of ownership. The higher the FLR is, the first level resolution, the lower your TCO will be. The third and more subjective criteria is this. You're following industry best practices. Now, the good news is that these best practices are pretty well understood, pretty well defined, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's a well-lit path. In fact, what we're presenting today is part of a larger 2-day conference that MetricNet delivers a few times a year on what it means to deliver world-class end-user support. And what we're presenting today is the metrics component of that, which, as I mentioned early on in my remarks, is the most important piece of being world-class. That is, to manage your metrics in an effective way. So the good news is you don't have to reinvent the wheel. The industry's best practices are extremely well defined. There's a well-lit path to becoming world-class. So for those of you that want to embark on that journey or want to maintain your level of performance if you're already world-class, I would encourage you to continue on with that journey because, as I mentioned, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Understanding what it means to be world-class is reasonably well documented. Fourthly, and most subjectively, every transaction adds value, and that means that the customer has a positive experience, whether they talk to a live agent, send you an email, engage in a chat, send a fax in, walk in, whatever it might be. You want that customer to come away thinking, that was a good experience, even though typically when customers contact you, they're in 911 mode. They've got an issue that needs to be resolved. They're either down, that is their network is down, their computer is down, some software is not working, they're trying to print something, whatever it might be. They typically don't call you up to tell you everything's going great. They call you up to let you know that they've got an issue. But what you want them to do is think as they walk away from that transaction that that was handled efficiently and that was handled effectively. And that in turn drives a positive view not just of IT support, but of all of IT. I'm going to show you some data towards the end of this presentation that might surprise you. But the reality is the vast majority of end-user opinion about all of IT, again, not just about support, but all of IT is formed through interactions with the service desk and with desktop support. Now, another way of defining what it means to be world-class is to look graphically at the relationship between cost, which is an efficiency measure, and quality, or customer satisfaction, which is an effectiveness measure. The blue circles here represent data points from our database. And what we're showing is that we've got a locus of points here showing that there is a relationship, in fact, it's a cause-effect relationship between cost per contact and customer satisfaction. Now, for some companies, quality is what drives the relationship. That is, they are pushing quality, and that drives cost. For other organizations, they are managing costs as aggressively as they can, and that will drive quality. So you can drive this curve from either side. You can drive it from the quality end, and that will push your costs in one direction or another, or you can drive it from the cost end, and that is going to have a certain impact on your quality. But there's a couple things you need to recognize about this diagram. The first one is fairly obvious. It's a nonlinear relationship. And what that says is that as your quality increases, cost increases disproportionately. That's nothing more than the diminishing returns effect. And that's true with almost any product or service. As you drive quality towards some hypothetical zero defect, 100% quality, a perfect customer interaction, however you might define perfect quality, the cost increases disproportionately. So one implication is that you can't afford to have zero defects. You can't afford to have 100% customer satisfaction. There will always be some defects in the way you deliver service. That's not only to be expected, but it is desirable, because if you were to attempt to drive all defects out of your system, you would be at such a high cost point that you could not justify staying in business as a support organization. It's helpful to know if you're way out here, by the way, because what it says is that you can reduce your cost pretty significantly without seeing much of a reduction in quality. Likewise, if you're way down here in the lower left, what it says is that if your quality is on the low side, you could probably improve it quite a bit without spending too much additional money. But the real intent of this chart is to define what it means to be world-class. Service desks that operate down here, I'll call them the average help desk or the average service desk, are just that. They're performing at an average level. It doesn't matter if you're up here and you're high cost or down here in lower cost. But to be truly optimized, you've got to be on this upper curve. We call this the best-in-class performance curve. Now, you can be very low cost and be on the lower side of quality and still be world-class, or you can be very high cost, extremely high quality, and be considered world-class. So when we get asked, gee, what's the cost per contact, the customer satisfaction, the first contact resolution rate for a world-class help desk? The short answer is I can't tell you unless I know how you are resource constrained. Because, like it or not, every support professional is resource constrained. You never have enough dollars or technology or computers or office space or software, whatever it is that you would like. I've never run into a professional in this industry that is not in some way, shape, or form resource constrained. So the real issue is not so much, can I spend $100 per contact, or do I only have $6 per contact to spend? The issue is, how do you use those limited resources, the limited headcount, dollars, technology, computers, office space, and so on and so forth, and do you deploy those in such a way that you achieve the best possible result? That's what being world-class is all about. I'm not impressed with a service desk that spends $100 per contact but doesn't achieve the level of performance that is possible when you're spending $100 per contact. By contrast, I've worked with support desks that are spending $5, $6, $7 per contact, but they manage to achieve a really high level of customer satisfaction given the limited resources they have. They are operating on this best-in-class performance curve. So the notion of being world-class is not an absolute notion. It's a relative notion. It's constrained by the resources you have at your disposal. And it is possible to be a low-cost, world-class support desk. It is also possible to be a very high-cost, world-class support desk. It's not about the resources you spend. It's about how you deploy those resources and whether or not you achieve this optimization. That is, you achieve the best possible result with the limited resources that you have at your disposal. That's another way of defining what it means to be a world-class support organization. Let's transition now and start talking about our model for KPI best practices that involves measuring your performance, using those measures diagnostically, developing action plans based on the diagnosis, and then implementing those action plans. Before we jump into the model, let me make the following point. Everything you see and hear today in this presentation is empirical in nature. This isn't the result of some academic exercise. There's nothing theoretical about what you're seeing. We've been at this now for 24 years. We've done nearly 2,000 help desk/service desk benchmarks. We've developed the largest database of process and performance indicators in the industry. We track more than 30 key performance indicators, and we've defined almost 80 industry best practices. So everything you're seeing today is based upon what we see in the industry. And if it's working, that is, when we see world-class support organizations that achieve those 4 criteria that I talked about earlier, low cost, high quality, they follow industry best practices, and they're adding value on every transaction, we ask ourselves, what are they doing that is unique? What do they have in common with other excellent support organizations? And those get fed into our library of industry best practices. And what you're seeing today is one slice of that library, the piece of it related to best practices for performance measurement and management. Now, our model for KPI excellence addresses performance measurement, diagnosis, prescription, and implementation, all arrayed around the central objective, not of customer satisfaction, which we believe is a losing proposition, but rather customer enthusiasm. Enthusiastic customers are very different than just satisfied customers. Enthusiastic customers want to do business with you. They propagate positive word-of-mouth referrals. They're loyal to you. They come back to you over and over and over again. There's a lot of stickiness between an enthusiastic customer and the support organization. That loyalty doesn't exist with a merely satisfied customer. So what we're after here are enthusiastic customers that sing our praises, that come back, that want to do business with us. And the 4 components of the model address measuring your performance, using those measures diagnostically, developing action plans based upon the diagnosis, and then implementing that. Let me give you a medical analogy here. If you go to see a doctor, the first thing the doctor typically does is measure you, your temperature, your heart rate, and blood pressure. They might do some blood chemistry work, but it typically starts with some measurement. Now, a good doctor isn't going to say, well, gee, your temperature is elevated, your blood pressure is high, go home and get better. That doctor hasn't done you any good. All they've done is measure some things and told you to go home and take care of yourself. A good doctor is going to go a step further and diagnose what those measurements mean. That is, they're going to interpret the blood pressure, the temperature, the blood work, the EKG, whatever measurements are involved, they're going to interpret that. And they're going to use that interpretation to develop a prescription. Now, this suggests prescription for drugs. That's not necessarily true, although it could be. It might be a prescription for a change in lifestyle. Get more rest, stop smoking so much, drink less, whatever it might be. It might be a prescription for surgery. But a good doctor is going to take the diagnosis and turn that into a prescription, and it's your job as the patient to do something with that prescription, to act on it so that you do improve your health over time. So our model is relatively simple, but it reflects the data quite well. Again, it's an empirical model. We see this over and over again in the industry. Start by measuring your performance. Use the measures to diagnose your strengths and limitations. Develop action plans, and then act on those action plans. So let's start with the measurement piece. And I'm going to put that chart up again that we looked at several pages ago. It's a big, ugly chart with a lot of key performance indicators on it. And I want to put your mind at ease by saying you don't have to track all these KPIs. In fact, I hope you don't. Because when it comes to best practices for help desk, service desk key performance indicators, less really is more. And the metrics that really matter are shown here on page 14. We start with what are called the foundation metrics, cost per contact and customer satisfaction. The reason we call those the foundation metrics is because everything you do in your service desk boils down to one of two things. You're either trying to contain costs, or in some cases reduce costs, or you're trying to drive a higher quality experience for the customer so that customer satisfaction is improved. Nothing else matters. Everything you do, from a training course to a piece of technology to a beer bash on a Friday afternoon, all of it has to be viewed through the lens of, in the long run, does this help me contain costs and help me drive a higher quality experience for the customer? If it doesn't do one or both of those things, then don't do it. It's as simple as that. So this should be a relief to a lot of people. This greatly simplifies how you think about how to manage a support organization. Manage it from these two perspectives, cost and quality. And if everything you do is oriented towards containing costs and driving a higher quality customer experience, then you'll be in good shape. Now, when I do an assessment or a benchmark for a service desk, I can't just go out there and tweak cost if I find that cost is too high. Or if customer satisfaction is not where it needs to be, I can't just go out there and wave a wand and say, customer satisfaction improved. No, what we have are underlying drivers of those metrics. The big driver of cost per contact is agent utilization. Why? Because this is a labor-intensive function, and 2/3 of the cost of a service desk or a help desk is tied up in labor. Half the cost is agent-related, that is salaries and benefits, and then another 17% or so, 17 percentage points, so the total is about 2/3, is tied up in indirect labor. We're talking about supervisors, team leads, workforce schedulers, trainers, QA, QC people, and the like. So if we look at salaries and benefits of the personnel that work in the support organization, the vast majority of cost is tied up in labor. So any serious attempt to rein in costs and to make sure that costs don't get out of control has to look at agent utilization, because that's where half your costs are tied up. Secondly, the biggest driver of customer satisfaction is first contact resolution rate. This is pretty well established. MetricNet was the first one that identified this relationship nearly 20 years ago. And we now have hundreds and hundreds of data points that show the relationship between FCR and customer satisfaction. And to nobody's surprise now, there's a pretty strong relationship. Every 1 percentage point increase in FCR drives an approximate 1 percentage point increase in customer satisfaction. Now we've got a few more metrics. We've got first level resolution rate. This is a total cost of ownership measure, and I'm going to describe this in a few moments. It's different than FCR. FCR says, first contact resolution says, you answer the customer's question or inquiry on the very first contact. First level says it doesn't have to be done on the first contact, but it does have to be done at level 1. There's an important distinction there. Almost everything that's done first contact is also done first level, but not everything done first level is also done on first contact. Agent job satisfaction is an important metric because it has a secondary impact on just about every other key performance indicator in the service desk. High levels of agent job satisfaction are correlated with high levels of customer satisfaction. They are also correlated with lower levels of turnover and absenteeism. They are also correlated with lower handle times, which translates into lower cost per contact. So what's not to like about this metric? If you have high agent job satisfaction, which is the equivalent of high agent morale, you're going to see a lot of positive benefits in your support organization. You're going to see lower costs, you're going to see higher customer satisfaction, you're going to see lower turnover and lower absenteeism. There's a lot of positive things to come out of high levels of agent job satisfaction. The even better news is this. You can manage that number. It's not something that just happens. It's not an accident that you have high or low agent morale. It can be managed, and we're going to talk about how that's managed when we get deeper into our presentation today. Final metric is an amalgamation or a conglomerate, I call it an aggregate here, of several other metrics. It's called the balanced scorecard. And the value of the balanced scorecard is this. There's no single metric on the service desk that gives you the whole picture. Cost per contact tells you how efficient you are. Customer satisfaction tells you how effective you are. Agent utilization tells you how productive you are, and so on and so forth. But there's no single metric that kind of gives you that letter grade for how your support organization is doing. The balanced scorecard does that for you. It aggregates and normalizes a number of other metrics, and it rolls them together into a single all-inclusive measure of help desk performance. And I'm going to explain how you can create your own balanced scorecard in about 2 minutes here. Now, for those who are so inclined, you can go to our website, MetricNet.com, and download a white paper we've got on the most important key performance indicators for the service desk. You can also go to another website we have called zenofsupport.com, spelled just like it sounds, zenofsupport.com, and you can download a number of white papers related to industry best practices. Now, the first metric we're going to discuss here is total cost of ownership related. That is our first level resolution rate. Now, there's a reason I'm starting here. We're going to be bouncing around a little bit on these key performance indicators as I show you benchmarking data and go through a case study and so on and so forth. And there's a reason that I'm doing it in this order that hopefully will become clear towards the end of the presentation. But our first metric is first level resolution. Before I get into a description of that and why first level resolution is so important, I'd like to open up a polling question on first level resolution. Let me go ahead and open that polling question. And here's a question. Do you track first level resolution for your help desk? And again, this is different than first contact resolution. FCR, first contact resolution, says that you resolve on the initial contact with the customer. First level resolution says you just do it at level 1. Not necessarily on first contact. And this is important. It's a proxy for total cost of ownership. You got 3 choices on your answer here. Yes, no, or if you're not affiliated with a support desk, you can answer NA, not applicable. Okay, we like to get as much participation as we can in these polls. We're up to about almost 80% participation. So if you haven't answered this polling question, please do so. Do you track first level resolution for your help desk, for your service desk? Okay, we're almost at 95% participation, so please weigh in on this one if you haven't weighed in on it just yet. And I'm going to go ahead and close that poll and then share the results with you. Okay, here we go. 57% of you are tracking first level resolution. Another 32% of you are not tracking first level resolution. And then for 11% of you, the question did not apply. So we've got not quite a 2-to-1 ratio of yeses to nos. We've got roughly 1/3 of the respondents saying, no, we don't track first level resolution, and almost 2/3, a little less than 2/3 saying, yes, we do track first level resolution. So literally as recently as about 18 months ago, this result would have been reversed. We would have had 57% saying, no, we don't track first level resolution, and 30% or so saying, yes, we do track first level resolution. So I think the message is getting out there that first level resolution is an important metric. It is a proxy for total cost of ownership when it comes to end user support. And I'm going to show you that right now. Let's look at how FLR is a proxy for total cost of ownership. What I'm showing here on page 17 is the average cost per ticket in North America last year for resolving customer incidents. Okay, at level 1, the average fully loaded cost per ticket was about $22. Now again, this is a fully loaded cost. It's all your agent salaries and benefits, all your salaries and benefits for indirect personnel, plus your overhead, that is your office space, your facilities costs, your insurance, your technology costs, your telecommunications costs, your training, your travel, your office supplies, everything divided by all incoming contacts, your chats, your voicemails, your voice contacts, your emails, your faxes, your walk-ins. So we've got a fully loaded cost divided by all contact volume here. $22 last year in North America. Now, for those tickets that get pushed up to desktop support, you can add another $62 on top of that $22. So this is not a $62 total cost. This is $62 on top of the initial $22. So the cost of resolution is higher when you push it to desktop support. Not everybody uses the same terminology. We're saying desktop and level 2 are the same things. Not everybody has that same terminology or vernacular, but everybody knows what desktop support is. The cost of resolution there tends to be quite a bit higher than it is at level 1. Why? Because there's travel time involved. Those technicians go to the side of the user typically and do troubleshooting. The cost tends to be higher. Then you've got level 3, which would be other IT groups, for example, applications, networking, the NOC, the data center, and so on. Add another $85 on top of the initial $22 and the $62 if it's gone through desktop support first. So you've got an $85 piece that gets added on to any support that was provided before this. Field support, close to $200 per ticket, and then when you get the vendor involved, you're talking about $500. So there's a saying in this industry which is get it done at level 1. Okay, well, that's a nice expression. It sounds like a cliche, but this is the proof that there's meaning behind that. The more you can resolve at level 1, the better, because the cost of resolution at level 1 is relatively inexpensive relative to desktop support. to level 3 IT support, field support, and vendor support. Anything you can do, you should do. This includes technologies such as remote diagnostic technologies that enable you to resolve things at level 1. It would include knowledge packs, knowledge management systems that enable you to resolve more at level 1. It would include training that enables you to resolve at level 1. And perhaps most importantly, it means having a SPOC, single point of contact support organization. So a typical SPOC works like this. You've got your service desk fielding incoming inquiries, questions, service requests, incidents, and the like from the user community. Service desk is not expected to resolve everything, but they are expected to be the traffic cop, the facilitator. They resolve what they can, and then they triage the rest. They decide if a ticket needs to go to desktop support or to field support, another level within IT, such as applications or the data center or the NOC, or if a vendor needs to get involved. So I'm not suggesting here that the level 1 service desk does everything, but they need to be the clearinghouse. They are the central point of this support organization, hence the term SPOC, single point of contact. The better this works, the lower your total cost of ownership is going to be. The more broken your SPOC is, or if you don't even have a SPOC, you're going to have a lot of customers calling level 2 directly, calling desktop support directly, calling field support, calling vendor support directly, and they're bypassing the SPOC model. And oftentimes what you find is that they're having vendors resolve tickets that should and could be resolved at level 1. They're having desktop support resolve tickets that could and should be resolved at level 1. Or they're having level 3 IT resolve tickets that could and should be resolved at level 1. That violation of the SPOC model costs the organization money. So the higher your level 1 resolution rate is, the lower your total cost of ownership is going to be. Getting it done at level 1, it turns out, is not just a cliche, not just an interesting expression. There's truth behind it. The more you can get done at level 1, the lower your support total cost of ownership is going to be. Now, I said I was going to jump around a little bit. We've talked a little bit about FLR, first level resolution. Let's talk about the balanced scorecard. I hinted that this was really the most practical way to develop a single overarching measure of your help desk performance. Now, here's how it works. You start by defining the key performance indicators you want in your scorecard. You can pick different ones from the ones I've shown here. That's okay. The ones I've picked are, in my opinion, probably among the most important. The next thing you want to do is weight each of these metrics according to its relative importance. We put 50% of the weight on cost and customer satisfaction because, as I mentioned earlier, those are the foundation metrics. Everything you do boils down to one of those two things. You're either containing costs or you're trying to drive a higher quality customer experience, and it should show up in customer satisfaction. The underlying driver of cost is agent utilization. Underlying driver of customer sat is first contact resolution rate. Then you've got agent job satisfaction, as I mentioned. That's an important metric because it drives a lot of other metrics in the support organization. And then we've got a service level metric. ASA, in my opinion, is not terribly important. As you'll see a little bit further in the presentation, it drives cost but not customer satisfaction. But since everybody in the world likes this metric and everybody in the world tracks this metric, we've sort of gratuitously included this in our scorecard. Of course, the weights have to add to 100%. Then what you have are some benchmarking ranges for this particular company that we created the scorecard for. So in their peer group, that is peer group of comparable support organizations, the highest cost per contact was $55, the lowest was $9, the worst customer satisfaction was 64%, the best was 97.5%, and so on. Then we took their performance and we put it in this column third from the right. You would do the same thing if you were constructing a scorecard for your organization. We can then calculate a score for each metric. Each score is going to range between 0 and 100%. Here's how we calculate it. We take the worst case in the peer group and we subtract your actual performance. That's your numerator. And then we divide that by the range, the worst case minus the best case. So this is an interpolation. The closer you are to 100, as this organization is on cost, the closer you are to the best case. The closer you are to 0, as this organization is in customer satisfaction, the closer you are to the worst case on the spectrum. So essentially this metric score is going to range from 0 to 100%. You'll be at 0 if you're at the worst case. You'll be at 100 if you're at the best case. And this tells you how far along the path you are from the worst case to the best case. Now what you're going to do is multiply each of these metric scores by the weightings shown over here in the second column, and you're going to end up with a balanced score for each of those metrics. And when you add that together, you come up with a single overall score for your service desk. Now you might look at this particular score, 56%, and say, that doesn't sound very good. You know, getting a score of 56%, last time I scored that on an exam, I didn't do so well in the class. But the reality is when we take hundreds of support organizations and run them through this algorithm, the average score is only 50%, and we get a nice bell-shaped curve sitting right over 50%. So you got tails running off to the right above 70%, tails running off to the left below 30%. If you're above 62%, typically you're in the top quartile for performance. If you're between 50 and 62%, you're in the second quartile, which this organization would be. If you're between 38 and 50%, you're going to be in the third quartile, and anything below 38% typically is going to be fourth quartile performance. Now, here's another advantage of having a score like that, is that you can benchmark yourself on a fair apples-to-apples level playing field versus other support desks. We just calculated this service desk score at 55.6%. That's their number here. Their bar is this one here, the orange bar. The average for this particular peer group, it's roughly 60 or 70 support organizations, was 50.3. That's what this dashed line is here. The high score was over 86. That's that number. The low score, 13.8%. That's this number over here on the far right. This is a valuable tool for comparing yourself to other support desks. It's also a valuable tool for tracking and trending your performance over time, as I've shown here on page 22. If you update your score at least once a month, or I should say once a month or at least once a quarter, what you can do is track and trend how your aggregate performance is changing. Now, for this real set of data for a particular client of ours from 2011, you can see that their performance did steadily improve throughout the year. They went from around 60% on their balance score to close to 80% on their balance score. Keep in mind, once again, that we're aggregating cost metrics with units of dollars or whatever your currency is, customer satisfaction metrics, productivity metrics, contact handling, agent metrics, and service level metrics. These have different units, many of them, yet we're still able to normalize them, aggregate them, roll them together, come up with a single measure that we can use to benchmark their performance and also track and trend our overall performance over time. So on any given month, you may see, well, your costs went up, but your customer satisfaction also went up. Does that mean that we're better off or worse off than we were last month? Balanced Scorecard answers that question for you. So you don't have to be looking at individual metrics and asking yourself, gee, they're all moving in different directions, so are we getting better or are we getting worse over time? If this number is going up, you're getting better over time. If the number is going down, just the opposite is happening. Now, I kind of glossed over, or I should say, perhaps I minimized the importance of using metrics to track and trend your performance, but that is the most obvious use of key performance indicators, is to track and trend your performance. So the only point I want to make about that is the following. If you're tracking and trending your performance, which you should be, you need to post your performance in an obvious location where everybody can see it. Not just those that work in the support organization, but those who happen to casually come by. Should be on a bulletin board or in a glass enclosed case, someplace obviously displayed, because that's an important way of demonstrating to lay people who don't know much about support that performance matters and that you're willing to be held accountable to the level of support that you deliver and your performance metrics. And it's a way of communicating to those that work in the support organization, in the service desk or the help desk, that performance is everybody's responsibility. So aside from the obvious value of metrics in terms of tracking and trending your performance, I would strongly suggest that you post at least a handful of performance metrics in an obvious location where everybody can see them. It sends a very positive signal to those who work in the support organization, as well as those that happen to come by and don't know that much about support. We're going to shift gears now, and we're going to look at the second component of our model. This is the diagnostic piece. I'm going to go to a benchmarking case study in a moment and use that to explain the remaining metrics on the short list of metrics that really matter. And since we're going to be using a benchmarking case study, let me go through a real quick definition of benchmarking. Most of you probably know what it is. Some of you have probably been through a benchmark before, so I apologize if you're hearing something you've heard before or you already know this, but I do want to give you kind of the thumbnail sketch, the 30-second overview of what benchmarking is. It starts with comparison. That is, you compare your performance to the performance of other support organizations. You look at your cost per contact, your customer satisfaction, your agent satisfaction, your agent utilization, your first level resolution rate, your first contact resolution rate, and you compare and you look for differences between the two. The more important thing, though, is not just comparison, but rather understanding. If somebody achieves a lower cost than you, how did they do that? If they get to a higher customer satisfaction than you, how did they get that? If they have a higher FCR or first level resolution rate, how did they achieve that? This is the real important piece of benchmarking, is understanding how those that are performing better than you achieve that. Because if you understand what they did and how they got there, you can do the same thing. You can adopt and adapt what they're doing and internalize it within your own organization so that you too can build a sustainable competitive advantage. You see, given enough time, any support organization can achieve world-class performance. The question is, how long is it going to take you to get there? I would submit that benchmarking is the quickest, most efficient way to get there. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to improve through trial and error, blood, sweat, and tears, incrementally. You can bypass all the incrementalism. You can leapfrog ahead of all that. You can improve not at an evolutionary pace, but at a revolutionary pace by building upon the proven best practices of the industry's superior performers. That's what benchmarking enables you to do. That's why it's such a powerful tool. Now, for those that want to read up more on this, we've written a white paper on how benchmarking works for support organizations. Go to our website, MetricNet.com, or go to zenofsupport.com. You can download the white paper at either one of those locations. Again, it goes through an analysis of how you would conduct benchmarking for a support organization. Now, earlier in the presentation, I talked about this relationship between cost and customer satisfaction. But I was using it for a different purpose back then. I was using it to explain what it means to be a world-class support organization. Here I'm using it for a different purpose. And what I want to convey is that benchmarking enables you to move the needle on both of these axes. If you're not yet optimized, in other words, if you're not operating on this upper curve, which we call the best-in-class performance curve, you have an opportunity to make your support organization more efficient, that's this axis, and more effective, that's the y-axis. So they say there's no free lunch, but if you're running an organization that is sub-optimized, if you haven't squeezed all the inefficiency and ineffectiveness out of the organization, there is a free lunch. It's called optimization. And what optimization enables you to do is drive a higher level of quality at the same cost, or improve or reduce your cost without sacrificing quality, or, as I said, moving the needle on both, cutting your costs and at the same time improving the quality of service. Benchmarking does this for you. Benchmarking paves the way, clears the path, shines a light on the path from average performance to best-in-class performance. That's the real value of benchmarking, is in its ability to get you to this upper curve, not in months or years, but literally in weeks if you're willing to follow the industry's best practices. And that brings us to our second polling question of the day. Our second polling question of the day, as you might expect, has something to do with benchmarking. And the polling question is this: have you benchmarked your help desk or service desk within the past year? You have three answers: yes, no, or not applicable. Have you benchmarked your help desk within the past year? Okay, we're already at 60% participation in this poll. As I said, we like to get as many people participating in this as we possibly can. Have you benchmarked your help desk within the past year? We're almost at 90%, so I want to give you a few more minutes to weigh in on this particular poll. We like to get as much participation as we can. Give you another 2 or 3 seconds here. Weigh in if you haven't done so. Have you benchmarked your help desk within the past year? Okay, here's what we've got. 34% of you, this looks a lot like the last poll, 34% of you, only a little bit reversed, I think it was 57 to 33 last time. 34% of you have benchmarked within the past year. Another 57% have not. And then for 9% of you, this question is not applicable. For those of you that haven't benchmarked within the past year and are thinking about doing benchmarking, I want to encourage you to continue going in that direction. I think you'll find that benchmarking is the single most effective, most efficient tool to help you achieve world-class performance. And to do it in a relatively short period of time. As I mentioned, you don't have to suffer through all the incremental improvements, all the blood, sweat, and tears associated with trial and error improvement when you can build upon the industry's proven best practices. So for those of you who have done it, congratulations to you. For those of you who haven't benchmarked in the past year, I want to encourage you to do so. And I apologize. I just realized I hadn't shown you the results of that. Here they are. 34% of you said, yes, you have benchmarked. 57% of you said, no, you haven't benchmarked within the past year. And again, just to recap my comments, for those of you who haven't benchmarked, I want to encourage you to think seriously about doing it because it is the quickest, most efficient way to get your support organization to a world-class level of performance. Okay, so I'm going to close that poll down, and we're going to move on now with our presentation. We've actually got a second polling question related to the polling question that I just gave you. Apologize for that. I'll get to questions, by the way, a little bit later in the presentation. This is the third and final poll of the presentation. And again, it has to do with the last question relating to benchmarking. And this question is, do you plan to benchmark your help desk in the future? So the last question was, have you benchmarked in the last year? This question asks you if you're planning to benchmark your help desk in the future. And we've got 5 answers: within the next 90 days, within the next 6 months, within the next year, no plans to benchmark, and then not applicable if you're not affiliated or associated with a support organization. Okay, we've got almost 80% participation. If you would weigh in on this one, do you plan to benchmark your help desk in the future? Okay, we're almost at 90%. Want to give you just a couple more seconds here. We'd like as many people as possible to weigh in on this one. Do you plan to benchmark your help desk in the future? Yes in the next 90 days, yes in the next 6 months, yes in the next year, or no plans to benchmark at this time. Okay, we're going to go ahead and close that poll down, and here are the results. 23% of you, yes, you're benchmarking within the next 90 days. 13% of you planning to benchmark within the next 6 months, 31% of you within the next year, and 21% of you don't have plans to benchmark at this time. What we've done in the past is we've looked at the relationship between those who don't plan to benchmark and those that have benchmarked in the last year, and there's usually pretty good overlap between those groups. So my hope this time is that those that don't have plans to benchmark are very much from that group on the last survey of those who had benchmarked within the past year. And for those that are planning to benchmark, 23% of you within the next 90 days, 13% in the next 6 months, and 31% in the next year. Once again, I want to encourage you to move forward with that because I do believe that you'll find it to be probably the single most effective and efficient investment you can make towards achieving world-class performance in your support organization. Okay, so I'm going to close that poll down, and we're going to move on with our discussion of key performance indicators. And we've already talked about first level resolution rate and the balanced scorecard, and I'm going to use a benchmarking case study to discuss the remaining metrics. First, the foundation metrics of cost per contact and customer satisfaction. Then we're going to look at the underlying drivers, which are agent utilization and first contact resolution rate. And then we're going to look at agent job satisfaction. So let's start by looking at some benchmarking data. Now, this is real benchmarking data, but it's not intended for benchmarking purposes. Now, why would I say that? Well, if you read our white paper on service desk benchmarking, one of the things you'll learn is that the single most important success factor in benchmarking is to find a peer group that is comparable to you. So if you're supporting complex business applications like SAP, applications in Oracle, and your handle times are 10, 15, 20 minutes or more, you're going to have to look for a peer group that is supporting a similarly complex environment, because the handle time makes a big difference on cost per contact. And so what you want to do is identify a peer group that looks like you in terms of scope of service, scale of service, meaning volume of contacts handled, scope, scale, geography, and complexity. Those are the 4 determinants of a peer group. That is, if you have comparability on those 4 dimensions, scope, scale, geography, and complexity, you're going to have a peer group that looks a lot like you. Now, the peer group that I'm showing here, there's an off chance that it might be a peer group that you belong in, but chances are it's not going to be. So you need to be careful. To continue with the example I gave a moment ago, the flip side of a support desk that provides support for these complex business applications would be a support desk that mainly does password resets, for example, or a support desk that provides support, for example, Microsoft Office suite of products. I just got a text that says that can't see my screen. Okay, let me see if I can fix things here. I do apologize for that. Okay. I got a text saying that you couldn't see my screen, so I'm hoping you can see it now. If you would, could you send me another text just to verify that my screen is showing? And I do apologize to everybody. I'm not sure how that happened, but hopefully you're able to see my screen now. Okay, it looks like you can see my screen. And once again, my apologies. I'm not sure what happened there, but hopefully you can see my screen now. The point I'm making is this. You need to be careful before you compare your data to what I'm showing on page 31, because although this is benchmarking data, it is not necessarily from a peer group that is like yours. Again, scope, scale, complexity, and geography is what drives comparability in a benchmarking peer group. We discussed that not only in our service desk benchmarking white paper, but on the same site, our white paper library, you can also download a white paper that talks about peer group selection. that talks about how you select a peer group so that you have that comparability and you know you're on an apples-to-apples basis, you're on a level playing field, you're engaging in a fair comparison. But that peer group selection is the single most important success factor in benchmarking. Okay, enough said about that. Let's look at the foundation metrics, which are cost per contact and customer satisfaction, because that's where I always go when I'm doing a benchmark. And if I look at the cost per contact here at $28.17, it's quite a bit higher than this benchmarking peer group, which is at $23. If I look at customer satisfaction at 63%, that doesn't sound very good, and it turns out it's not. The peer group average is at 79%. So we've got a couple of issues here with our foundation metrics. Our costs are high, and our customer satisfaction is low. That's not good. Both of the foundation metrics are not where they need to be. High cost, low customer satisfaction is a recipe for failure. It's a recipe for disaster, and we need to figure out what's going on here. So the reason I've set up this case study is so we can go through the other 6 key performance indicators on our short list, or 5 key performance indicators on our short list, and talk about how we use them diagnostically to figure out why the costs are high and why the customer satisfaction is low. So let's start with the foundation metrics, which are cost per contact and customer satisfaction. If we look at them on a cost versus quality axis, cost on the x-axis with lower cost on the right, that's somewhat counterintuitive. We've got lower cost on the right, higher cost on the left. In quality, we got lower quality on the lower end of the y-axis. We got higher quality on the higher end of the y-axis. And where you want to be here is in this upper right quartile, because this is where you are both efficient, meaning low cost, and effective, meaning high quality. That's really the holy grail of running a support organization. If you can be both low cost and high quality, you've achieved something pretty significant. So everybody ought to strive to be in this upper right quadrant where your costs are below average. Remember, these are the two of the 4 criteria that made up our world-class definition. So low cost, that is below average. The average line is this vertical one going through here, and the average customer sat is the horizontal one going across here. If you're above average on customer satisfaction and below average on cost, you're going to be in this upper right-hand quartile, which is where you want to be. And those that are truly optimized are going to operate out on this curve. And this is very similar to the curve I showed you earlier. A service desk here is going to be extremely low cost, but they're still going to have customer satisfaction that is above the industry average. A service desk here is going to have customer satisfaction that is way above the industry average, but they're also going to be relatively high cost, even though their costs will be slightly below the industry average. This upper right-hand curve, the perimeter I call it, the optimized perimeter, is where you want to be operating. If you're on the upper left, it says that your costs are high, but your quality is also high, and you need to reduce your cost over time. If you're in the lower right, you're low cost, but you're low quality as well, and you need to improve your quality over time. If you're in the lower left, you have the worst of everything. You are both high cost and low quality, and you need to take measures that will both reduce your cost over time and improve the quality of support over time. So when you think about the foundation metrics, think about this trade-off between cost and quality, because there is a trade-off. You can't be both the lowest cost and the highest quality service desk in the world or the industry or your vertical or anything else. There is a linkage between these two. And if you want to be high quality, you're going to pay for it at some level. And if you want to be a low cost, you're going to see a sacrifice in quality at some level. So there is a trade-off between these two metrics. Some make a decision to move in the direction of lower cost. It doesn't mean that you have to go below the average on quality. Some make a decision to be high quality, but it doesn't mean that you have to go above average on your cost. But being on this outer curve means that you have optimized your cost-quality trade-off. Any point along that curve indicates that you're performing at a world-class level. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we have to look at the underlying drivers of cost and quality, because I can't just go out there and turn a screwdriver and reduce the cost, or I can't go out there and tweak something and make customer satisfaction go higher. But I do have control over agent utilization, and I do have control over first contact resolution. Let me show you how agent utilization drives cost. Let me show you how FCR drives customer satisfaction. On page 35, I'm showing agent utilization on the x-axis. I'm showing cost per contact on the y-axis. The blue diamonds are data points. The red line is the linear regression through the data. Not surprisingly, as agent utilization goes up, cost goes down. Again, this is a labor-intensive function. half your costs are agent related, 2/3 of your costs are personnel related when you look at the indirect personnel. And the slope here is about 2 to 1. That is, every 2 percentage point increase in utilization yields an approximate 1 percentage point decrease in cost per contact. So higher levels of utilization help drive down your cost, but you need to be careful about driving this too hard, because if your utilization gets much above 60%, you'll start to see higher levels of burnout, which lead to absenteeism and turnover. So that's not a good thing. What you don't want to do is push this indefinitely. Certainly you don't want to be above 70%. And a lot of people are sometimes surprised to hear that 50% utilization is the industry average. Well, it turns out it is about the industry average worldwide. I'm going to define for you how agent utilization is calculated. We look at inbound contacts multiplied by handle time, outbound contacts multiplied by outbound handle time. We divide that by the number of working hours or minutes in a month. You've got typically 21.5 working days. You've got 7.5 to 8 hours in a day. You've got 60 minutes per hour. So on average, you're only looking at about 50% utilization. On page 37, I've gone through an example of how you might calculate agent utilization. And once again, the industry average is only about 50%. A lot of people are surprised. But keep in mind that what we don't do is back out holidays, vacation days, sick time, training time, auxiliary time. We don't back any of that kind of stuff out. So we measure everybody worldwide in exactly the same way, because every company's got a different approach to utilization, a different definition of utilization. And if I took them at their word, you'd believe that some of these service desks are achieving over a 100% utilization, and that every service desk in the world is above 90% utilization, but it's just not true. So we measure them this way, looking at inbound and outbound contacts, divided by working minutes in a month. Believe it or not, there's about 10,000 working minutes in a month. And on average, the phone in ear time, which is what this measures, PI time, phone in ear time, is about 50%. Now what about FCR, first contact resolution rate? As that number increases, we see customer satisfaction go up. This is not just a spurious correlation. This is a cause-effect relationship. If you pull on the FCR lever, that is, you improve your first contact resolution rate, whether it be through training, through tools like remote diagnostic software and knowledge management, you can improve your customer satisfaction. The ratio here is closer to 1 to 1. For every 1 percentage point increase you get in FCR, you realize an approximate 1 percentage point increase in customer satisfaction. Okay, let's look at how service levels affect agent utilization. We're drilling down here. See where we started with our foundation metrics? We looked at the drivers of the foundation metrics. Now we're looking at the drivers of the drivers. Now, as average speed of answer decreases, as you go towards, a 30-second, a 5-second, a 10-second average speed of answer, the cost goes up. If you've ever worked in workforce scheduling, you know why. Because if you're trying to keep your speed of answer down, or you're trying to keep your abandonment rate down, the same trend holds with call abandonment rate, you need more bodies to answer the phones quickly so that you can keep the speed of answer down and you can minimize the call abandonment rate. So when you look at service levels like ASA and abandonment rate, which pretty much everyone tracks, there's this common mythology in the industry that a low speed of answer and a low abandonment rate is desirable. Well, if it didn't cost you anything, it would be desirable, but it does cost you something. And there's a mistaken notion, a mythology as I called it, that the lower you are on ASA and the lower you are on abandonment rate, the happier your customers are going to be. But that's not true, and here's the data to prove it. If we look at ASA versus customer satisfaction, what we've got is a big flat range up here where ASA does not drive customer satisfaction. Likewise, for call abandonment rate, what we have is a very similar relationship. Once again, blue diamonds are data points. The red line is a regression. In this case, it's a nonlinear regression. But what we show here is that ASA, as you drive ASA towards a very low level, you're not doing anything for customer satisfaction. Same thing with abandonment rate. It doesn't help your customer satisfaction, but it does drive your costs. So why would you do it? Why would you go to a 10-second ASA or even a 30-second ASA if all it does is increase your cost but does nothing for customer satisfaction? Same thing with abandonment rate. Why would you go to a 1% abandonment rate if it does nothing for customer satisfaction but it does drive up your costs? This is the important thing. There's a sweet spot here. In fact, you can go to our website, download the metric of the month when it relates for both ASA and abandonment rate, and it will talk about where that sweet spot is. For abandonment rate, it's around 7 or 8%. For average speed of answer, it's about 10% of your handle time. So if you have a 10-minute handle time, 10% of that is going to be 1 minute. If you have a 10-minute handle time, what this chart tells you is that if your average speed of answer is 1 minute, you're okay. You don't need to go to 30 seconds or 20 seconds or 10 seconds or 5 seconds. A minute is just fine. If you have a 20-minute handle time, a 2-minute speed of answer is fine. If you have a 5-minute handle time, 30 seconds is going to be fine. If you have a 2-minute handle time, you're going to need a 12-second speed of answer. The point here is that ASA is judged as a percentage of total handle time. It's not judged in absolute terms. If you call 411, that is the information number, you expect a 1 or 2 second speed of answer. Why? Because the transaction is under 20 seconds. That is, when you get to a live person, if you do get to a live person, the transaction goes very quickly. It's under 20 seconds. So you expect a quick speed of answer. Most support customers, most end users understand when they call the support desk that the speed of answer is relatively unimportant, and they're willing to forgive you an occasional abandoned call if they know when they reach you, they're going to get to a competent source of support. First contact resolution rate, that's how they judge you, not by how quickly you answer the phones or whether they abandon a call periodically. They want competence, not speed at the front end. So this notion that customers want a quick speed of answer and a low call abandonment rate is just nonsense. All it does is drives up your cost, does nothing for customer satisfaction. The real focus needs to be on first contact resolution rate, because this is what drives customer satisfaction. Okay, enough said about those underlying drivers of agent utilization. What about first contact resolution rate? Does training impact it? It sure does. If we look at new agent training hours versus first contact resolution rate, once again, blue diamonds are data points, red line is a linear regression through those data points. We can see that as new training hours increase, so too does FCR. What about the training that agents get on an annual basis, on an ongoing basis? Once again, as that number increases, first contact resolution rate goes up. So although it's motherhood and apple pie to talk about training hours, there are a lot of people that walk the walk, or excuse me, talk the talk, but don't walk the walk. There's real data here to suggest that training hours, if the training is appropriate, is likely to drive higher levels of first contact resolution rate. And that, in turn, drives higher levels of customer satisfaction. And all these blue diamond points down here on the y-axis, what is that? That's 0 annual training. These are agents that got some initial training, probably not enough, and then on an ongoing basis, they get no formal training. So there's a lot of blue diamonds down here on the y-axis. Those that invest in ongoing training see higher levels of first contact resolution rate and, in turn, see higher levels of customer satisfaction. Why? Because as FCR goes up, so too does customer satisfaction. So you can see the cause-effect relationship here. Training hours drive, let me go back, training hours drive FCR, and that in turn drives customer satisfaction. So now we can put this build together of our chart of KPI correlations and cause-effect relationships. We start with the foundation metrics of cost per contact and customer satisfaction. They are driven respectively by agent utilization and FCR, first contact resolution rate. Those in turn are driven by these third level or tertiary metrics. By the way, the ones that are in red are the ones that showed up on our short list. Remember, cost per contact was on our short list, as was customer satisfaction, FCR, first level resolution rate, our TCO measure, agent utilization. And then agent satisfaction has an impact on customer satisfaction. It also drives your turnover and absenteeism. So what drives agent satisfaction? Well, coaching. Agents like that. The more they get, the higher the satisfaction will go. And this answers the question I mentioned very early on, which is agent satisfaction doesn't just happen. It can be managed. And if agents get the appropriate amount of training, coaching, and there's a formal career path that they are aware of, and they understand what their career options are, you have an opportunity here to manage agent satisfaction, to drive agent satisfaction higher. That in turn will have an impact on customer satisfaction. So the red metrics, again, were the ones that were on our short list. We're not showing the balanced scorecard on this particular page because it relates to all of these metrics. But what we're showing are the other metrics and what their cause-effect relationships are. Okay, now that we understand how the KPIs interact and interrelate to each other and which ones drive which other ones, this puts you in a very powerful position to pull levers that you need to pull in order to achieve desired objectives. If you want to improve customer satisfaction, start by improving first contact resolution rate. If you want to get your costs down, take a look at agent utilization and service levels. If you want to improve your customer satisfaction even more, look at agent satisfaction, which can be controlled through coaching, career pathing, and training. And if you want to minimize your total cost of ownership and support, maximize your FLR, your first level resolution. So now we're back to our benchmarking page. Remember what we started out with: high cost, low quality, bad combination. We have to do something about it. And remember the second part of our model. We start by measuring. The second part is diagnosis, which is really sort of shorthand for benchmarking. If you're not benchmarking at least once a year, I want to strongly encourage you to do so. There's a one-to-one relationship, as I mentioned very early on in this broadcast, between support organizations that benchmark and those that are world-class. Now, there's a chicken or egg debate, which is pretty pointless, but I'll tell you what it is. Some people say that you are world-class because you benchmark. Others say that you benchmark because you're world-class. The fact is there are some in both camps. Some organizations are world-class because of benchmarking. Others benchmark because they are world-class. The key point to remember is that there's almost a one-to-one relationship between annual benchmarking and support organizations that truly are world-class. So let's diagnose what's going on here. We've got high cost. We've got low quality. We know that cost is a function of utilization. So we go down here and we look at agent utilization, which at 47%, it's below the peer group average of 53.1%. So we've got one smoking gun right there: low agent utilization. Remember our cause-effect diagram? We also showed that service levels impact your cost. Service levels drive agent utilization, which in turn drive your cost per contact. So let's look at the service levels. The ASA for the support desk was 18 seconds. The abandonment rate was 2.9%. When I asked them, why do you have an 18-second ASA and a 2.9% abandonment rate, the answer was, the CIO told us to keep the average speed of answer under 20 seconds and the abandonment rate under 3%. Okay, this is a classic example of someone who's misguided about the importance of service levels. You can see that the peer group is at 45 seconds average speed of answer and an 8.1% call abandonment rate. Now look at the handle time here. It's about 12 minutes. You don't need an 18-second speed of answer for a 12-minute handle time. You don't need a 3% abandonment rate. I've gone through that data. I've debunked that myth. So what this organization had were service levels that were driving headcount too high, which in turn reduced their agent utilization, which in turn drove up their costs. Remember, connect the dots. We've got service levels that are too aggressive, agent utilization is low, so cost is going to be high, and that's exactly what we're seeing here. So the short story, which is the same as the long story, was that all they had to do was back off on these service levels, let them float up to a more reasonable level, like 45 seconds ASA. Remember, 10% is all you need on, ASA versus handle time. So these organizations, or this particular support desk, at a 12-minute handle time would be fine with an ASA of about 1 minute and 10 seconds. They don't need an 18-second ASA. That's absurd. But if they let it float up to 45 seconds, they're going to be fine. If they let their abandonment rate float up to, say, 7%, 8.1 is a little bit on the high side, but if you let it go to 7%, you'll probably be okay. And if you look at their turnover is 30% per year, which is about what the industry average is. And what they needed to do was downsize a little bit. They had too many FTEs, too many full-time equivalent headcounts. Well, when you find out that you got too many people working in a support organization, driving low utilization, high cost per contact, you can use turnover to your advantage. How? Well, you just attrit. That is, you lose 1 or 2 or 5 or 10 people, however many it takes, to get down to a head count where your utilization is closer to 50 or 55%, and your service levels do drift up to a level that's more in line with what is necessary to deliver lower cost. Let's look at the second foundation metric, which is customer satisfaction. At 63%, it doesn't look good relative to 79%. But remember the cause-effect diagram. FCR is your big driver of customer satisfaction. So when we look at first contact resolution rate, they're at 51.3%. The peer group's at 71.2%. Big gap there. Let's go back to our cause-effect diagram. What's the big driver of FCR? Well, training hours is a big one. So let's look at their training hours. Okay, initially, agents get 36 hours of training before they're let loose on the phones. On an annual basis, they get 12 hours of training. Look at how that compares to the peer group. The peer group's at 79 hours of initial training, 34 hours of ongoing training. The short answer, or the short story again, same as the long story, not enough training. They weren't investing in the right training resources. They weren't focusing on first contact resolution rate as the real driver of customer satisfaction. So they made some changes, and over about a 180-day period, over 6 months, they invested in training, specifically with an emphasis and a focus on increasing the first contact resolution rate. And lo and behold, within a relatively short period of time, they had not only achieved the same FCR as a peer group, they were actually up a little bit over 80% on first contact resolution rate, and customer satisfaction followed shortly thereafter. they hit an 85% customer satisfaction rate within about 6 months after this benchmark was done. Here's what I want you to get out of this, is that the key performance indicators are very logically connected to each other. And if you know how they interact with each other, how they're interconnected, and how you can pull certain levers, certain KPI levers to achieve desired outcomes, whether they're cost outcomes, that is lower cost, or customer satisfaction, quality outcomes, you have a great deal of flexibility, you have a great deal of choice, you have a great deal of power to pull the levers that you need to pull in order to achieve desired outcomes. So what we've gone through here is a short benchmarking case study that illustrates the power of this short list of key performance indicators that I introduced about 40 minutes ago. And if you understand how they're interrelated and interconnected, you can do amazing things in your support organization. You can contain and manage your costs, and you can control your customer satisfaction, and you can also control and maintain and manage your agent job satisfaction. Remember the 3 big drivers: coaching, career pathing, and training hours. That's what drives agent job satisfaction. I'm going to pause and do some Q&A right now. And I probably won't get to all the questions because there's a fairly lengthy list, it looks like. But I will answer some of the questions right now. And then at the conclusion of the webcast, I'll answer any remaining questions that you might have. I'll stay on as long as anybody has questions. Okay, from Francisco, anyone have a recommendation on tools or devices for listening in on agent calls when our phone system doesn't allow it? I'm going to have to skip that question, Francisco, because we're vendor agnostic. We're not aligned with any vendors. There are plenty of tools out there, though, that enable you to do that, so-called silent monitoring, where you either listen in on the call or you record the call and later replay the call in the presence of the agent and provide the agent with feedback. There are plenty of tools out there that allow you to do that, and you're on to a good thing. This is one of the things that drives agent job satisfaction is frequent feedback. The agent should be getting at least monthly feedback on how they're performing, and if you have recorded calls, typically 2 to 4 recorded calls per month that you go through with the agent, that's a good thing because you can provide very specific feedback and coaching on how that agent can improve their performance. Carlos wants to know about the presentation. Carlos, when you get out of the webcast, just answer the short questionnaire and we'll send you the presentation. A question from David. I noticed you did not mention abandonment rate or RONA, return on no answer, as a KPI. Should we track how the calls are answered, or is that just given as a best practice? Yeah, abandonment rate is useful to know, but it's not something that you need to minimize. We've just been through that example. Abandonment rate, not terribly important, but yes, it probably is a metric you ought to track because it does impact customer satisfaction. If you get above 9 or 10% abandonment rate, you do see customer satisfaction fall off fairly rapidly. RONA, return on no answer. I'm not sure. I've actually, to be honest with you, I've never seen that metric tracked, so I'm not quite sure what it means. But if a customer tries to reach the service desk and they don't get an answer, if they've got a real issue, they're most likely going to call back or email back or have a chat or maybe directly call somebody else in the support chain, maybe at level 2 or desktop support. But it's highly unlikely that they're just going to let it stop because presumably they've got something in their work environment that represents a hindrance or an impediment or perhaps a stoppage altogether. So return on no answer, like I said, I've never seen that metric before, but my guess is that it's close to 100%. And if they don't reach the service desk on their second call, they're probably going to reach some other source of support. Okay, from Juan, cost per resolution is by call, hour, support, day. The cost of resolution is usually cost per incident or cost per ticket. That's how we normalize it. From Ed, what about those who are under so much pressure to have first contact resolution that they spend more time and impact service level by hanging on to tickets too long in a quest for first contact resolution? The way around that, Ed, is as follows. Agents need to be held accountable not just for FCR, and they should be held accountable for FCR, but they also need to be held accountable for productivity. That is, how many tickets they handle in a month. And if they have a productivity metric, like let's just make up a number, say 400 tickets a month or 500 tickets a month that they need to handle, and an FCR metric, there will be a self-regulating mechanism that says, gee, I've been on this call for 12 minutes now, 15 minutes, 20 minutes. At some point, I need to move on because I also have a productivity metric. So that's the real art of metrics in a support environment, is that every metric pulls in one direction or another, and what you want to do is find the point of minimum tension. So cost or efficiency pulls you in one direction, quality pulls you in a different direction, FCR might pull you in a direction towards longer handle times, but if you put the right weights on those metrics and the right incentives on those metrics, what you do find is a point of minimum tension where an agent naturally gravitates towards that point where they are effecting a reasonable trade-off between cost, quality, and productivity. Hey, from Terry. And by the way, Ed, a little bit later in this presentation towards the end, we're going to talk about something called the agent scorecard, and this will come up again. Terry, what's the difference between field support and desktop support? Not every organization, Terry, makes a distinction, but field support in general is when you have to get in a vehicle and go to the site of the problem, ticket, break fix, whatever it might be, whereas desktop support is usually walking. That is, you're going to the site of the ticket as opposed to driving in a car or getting on an airplane, that kind of thing. So field support tickets typically are more costly because there's more travel time involved, whereas desktop support tickets tend to be a little bit lower cost. From Lori, if you pick different metric and weight on your second scorecard, how can you see where you are compared to others? Well, if you have data from other support organizations, all you have to do is apply the same weights to that data. This is the thing about a balanced scorecard, is that what you want to do is compare yourself to other support organizations, and you can pick any set of metrics you want and any set of weightings that you want, but you need to have that data from the peer group that you're comparing against. Another question from Ed. I hear about job satisfaction driving customer satisfaction, but how is that relationship determined? Is it causal or parallel? Okay, I've not heard the term parallel. I think you're asking, is it causal or simply spurious? It is a causal relationship. We can test that with a number of statistical tests, including the student t-test and others. We can look at goodness of fit. We can look at R-squared. There's a variety of relationships we can look at for two sets of data or two metrics to determine whether or not it's just a spurious correlation or a cause-effect relationship. And with customer satisfaction, it is a cause-effect relationship. It's a secondary driver behind FCR, but it is a cause-effect relationship. Okay, let's see, question from Richie. Will you be sending us a copy of the deck? Yes, if you answer the questionnaire. Okay. There's a lot of questions queued up here. I apologize, I can't answer all of them now because I want to finish the webcast by 3:30 Eastern Time. So I'm going to close this window down. I will, however, answer the remaining questions when I get to the end of the webcast. For those of you whose questions I didn't get to and want to ask a question or want to hang on at the end to have your question answered, I will be answering those questions. Now, the final two sections go fairly quickly. It'll take me just 12 or 15 minutes to go through the final sections of our presentation, starting with prescription. Keep in mind at this point we've talked about the key performance indicators that really matter. Remember, less is more. We've talked about benchmarking to diagnose strengths and weaknesses. Now we're in a position to be able to say, okay, what do we do with that diagnosis? Starting on page 51, I've got 4 pages. The first 4 pages that look very much alike. The first one has to do with key performance indicators, that is measurement and management. Second page has to do with human resources. The third one has to do with ticket handling or processes. And then we've got technology. So you've heard of the people, process, technology pyramid, and we've got that order going here. But even before human resources, we believe that performance measurement is even more fundamental, because you could be doing a great job on managing your human resources. You could be doing a great job with your processes and procedures, and you might have great technology. But if you don't have a well-developed, mature, underlying measurement discipline, you're not going to be able to do much with those human resources or your processes or your technology. So we start with performance measurement. That's the building block upon which we build the human resources, the ticket handling, and the technology. Now let me explain what we've got in these charts. I'll use the human resources chart as an example. In the upper right-hand corner, we've listed a number of key performance indicators. I call these the affected KPIs. We've got cost per ticket, customer satisfaction, agent utilization, first call res rate, and so on and so forth. In the body of the chart, what we've got are some shorthand best demonstrated practices listed down the left. By the way, this is not a comprehensive list of human resource best practices. In our best practice model, we've actually got 17 best practices related to human resources. What I've done here, just for illustrative purposes, I've shown some of the better understood, better known best practices when it comes to human resources. Let's look at this career pathing best practice. We call it career pathing. We've got a description of it here. The career path has been formalized and documented. They often include vertical, meaning management, as well as lateral promotion. Lateral is typically technical, technical competence. Performance levels required for advancement are clearly articulated and well known. Agents are encouraged to take charge of their own career and skills development. It's not the job of the service desk to baby the agent along and tell them what they need to do with their career, but it is the job of the management of the service desk to make sure that the agents understand that there's a career path, know how they can learn about the career path, and once again are encouraged to take ownership over that career path. Now at the intersection here of the best practice and the affected KPIs, we've got a series of cells. Some are white, some are dark blue, some are light blue. A light blue cell is an indication that there's a weak cause-effect relationship between the affected KPI and the best practice. So recruiting has a lot to do with your effectiveness in human resources. In fact, psychometric recruiting is becoming more and more common and pervasive when it comes to support professionals. You can actually reduce turnover dramatically through psychometric recruiting. That is identifying those individuals that have not just the technical skills and the customer soft skills, but also the temperament to do well in an environment like this, because we know that technical and customer soft skills are not enough. You also have to be able to take the rapid-fire questions from customers, disappointments from customers, anger from customers, their panic when they call in. Not everybody can do it. In fact, not that many people can do this well, but psychometric recruiting helps you maximize the chance that a person will be successful in this environment. Now, you're at recruitment. The quality of the person that you recruit does have a minor impact on call quality. It does have a major impact on your turnover. Likewise, if we look at FCR, training has a huge impact on your first call resolution rate, but training doesn't have much impact at all on agent utilization. So again, a white cell at the intersection of the affected KPI and the best practice indicates no cause-effect relationship, little or no cause-effect relationship. Light blue means weak cause-effect relationship. Dark blue indicates strong cause-effect relationship. So if I'm trying to improve my customer satisfaction, if I've just done a benchmark and my CSAT is low, I know I can get that up through training, and to a certain extent I can provide coaching and feedback for the agents and put performance standards in place around customer satisfaction that are going to improve that metric. Likewise for first call resolution rate, I know I can improve it through training, and also, believe it or not, just creating a performance standard for first contact resolution rate goes a long ways towards improving a support organization's performance relative to first contact resolution rate. So this is how you use this set of charts. We've got one for performance measurement and management, one for human resources, one for ticket handling, and one for technology. And if you do a benchmark, or you just know, for example, your customer sat is not where it needs to be, or your handle time is too high, or your FCR is low, or your cost per ticket is too high, then you can refer to these charts as sort of a shorthand or a cheat sheet, if you will, for how you can improve these metrics by implementing or improving the practices that we have identified. On this page, we're looking at human resource practices. This page, we're looking at ticket handling processes and procedures. And on page 54, we're looking at technology and how that impacts the key performance indicators. One implication of this is the following. Technology is not by itself a success factor in most organizations. You're far better off spending your time and attention on performance management and human resources than you are investing in technology. Another way of putting it is that we've seen some world-class support organizations that have pretty rudimentary technology. By contrast, we've seen support organizations that have invested enormously in technology, and they're still not achieving what we consider to be world-class levels of performance. Technology by itself doesn't drive world-class performance. It can enable world-class performance, but you're far better off making your investments first in performance measurement, in human resources, and even process and procedure before you spend money on technology. Now on this set of slides, starting on page 55, we've got a series of charts that show, this is just a tool that MetricNet uses. I'll go to an example here. Let's say we're trying to close a gap on agent satisfaction. That is, we've just done a benchmark. We find that agent satisfaction is not where it needs to be. We want to improve agent satisfaction. Our target is 80%. We know that if we increase the number of training hours, both new agent training hours and annual or veteran agent training hours, that will improve agent satisfaction. We know that having a career path will improve it. We know that giving them coaching and feedback, we know rewards and incentives. All of these things will drive agent satisfaction. So what I'm showing on these charts is a very simple mechanism for closing a performance gap in any place that you identify the gap. It doesn't matter which KPI you have the gap in. You can put together a chart like this where you show the key performance indicator, you list what your target is. If you understand the drivers, remember we've been through that several times now. We've looked at what the drivers are. This is a pretty good chart to show you how the most important key performance indicators in a service desk are interconnected and interrelated. And if you understand those, you can close these gaps by implementing a best practice prescription. That's what we just went through, are some of the best practices related to technology, ticket handling, human resources, and performance measurement and management. Very simple tool, but very powerful in terms of closing performance gaps and achieving world-class performance. Final section of our model has to do with implementation. So we've talked about less is more, short list of key performance indicators. We've talked about benchmarking. That's the key to diagnosis. We've talked about prescription. And by the way, when you get to this point in the process, prescription is usually pretty obvious. If you've correctly diagnosed what's happening, then you generally know what you need to do. If you've identified why your FCR, your first contact resolution rate, is low, or your customer satisfaction is low, or your utilization is low, or your cost is high, generally, when you get to this stage, because you have diagnosed what drives that performance gap, that negative performance gap, you generally know what you need to do. So when you get to this stage, implementation, it's really just a question of moving forward. In the, words of Nike, just do it. So what I've shown on page 61 is an example implementation chart. Now this really simplifies and understates, what an action plan might look like. But the point of showing you this is the following. We had a service desk that we were working with a couple of years ago that was really not in very good shape at all. And they determined that they were going to make investments that were necessary in order to become world-class. They started at the end of February, and by the end of December, that is 10 months, they had, in fact, achieved world-class performance. Their action plan was pretty straightforward. There were 8 items on the plan. The first thing they did was they documented their call handling standards and procedures. They put in place a balanced scorecard so that they could judge their progress and performance. They hadn't been surveying their customers, so they started doing that. They created a bona fide agent career path. They started doing root cause analysis to understand the ticket profile better and figure out how they can improve FCR, since that drives customer satisfaction. They put in place a set of agent performance standards. They simplified the VRU menu, and they put in place call monitoring. To one of the questions that was asked a little bit earlier, they started doing silent monitoring, recording 4 calls per agent per month, and then doing coaching sessions with those agents and going through how the agent could improve their performance on the calls. Let's not forget that one of the key purposes of KPIs, or one of the most important purposes of KPIs, is for establishing performance goals. Now there's 2 sets of goals you need to be aware of. There's the help desk domain and there's the agent domain. You need goals for both of those. But the reason you have to push these down to an individual level is because the help desk is not a living, breathing being. A help desk can't respond to a goal, but people do. So if you establish a goal of $21 per contact for the help desk and 80% customer satisfaction and 60% utilization, the help desk doesn't know you've established that goal. What you have to do is drive that down to an individual level. And sometimes the goals take a different form. You can't push a cost goal down to an individual agent, but you can push a productivity goal down to an individual agent. And in this particular case, if the agent's handling 650 contacts per month, the help desk overall will achieve their $21 cost per contact goal. So certain metrics can be pushed down to an individual agent level, like customer satisfaction, and you'll see that the agent goal is higher than the service desk or help desk goal. That's just in case some of the agents miss their goal. You can still hit the overall organizational goal. So it's important to establish performance goals both for the help desk domain and for the agent domain, so the agents can be held accountable and responsible for their performance. And in that vein, I mentioned earlier that we were going to talk about how you can hold individual agents accountable. We're not talking about an agent scorecard that covers all the agents in your service desk. We're talking about an agent scorecard that is created and updated monthly for every agent that works in your service desk. Now, mechanically, this works exactly the same as the scorecard that we constructed earlier for the entire service desk. We've got some metrics here that are important for the individual agent performance. Inbound contacts handled, that's a productivity measure. Customer satisfaction, you want to be able to track tickets by incident so that you can tie it back to an individual agent. The agent utilization, another productivity metric. The FCR, teamwork, initiative, and mentoring. Now these final 3 are very subjective. but you can still quantify them. We quantify them on a scale of 1 to 5. 5 says that you do teamwork extraordinarily well. You take a lot of initiative. You're very good at mentoring. A 1 says just the opposite. You don't engage in team activities. You're not a team player. You don't take much initiative. You don't mentor anybody. So even these subjective factors can be objectified, can be quantified by putting a scale in here, which is what I've shown here. Now the value of the scorecard is this. What you're doing is quantifying the agent's performance, and that in turn objectifies the process of delivering feedback to that agent, whether it's done monthly or quarterly or even weekly, as some of our clients do. What you've done is you've created a way of measuring their performance that is very easy to discuss. There's very little subjectivity that goes into this, and it makes it a lot easier to deliver feedback. It makes it a lot easier for the agent to accept the feedback. More importantly, it's diagnostic in the sense that the agent can look at this and act on it and say, wow, I'm doing great on teamwork, doing great on mentoring. I'm not doing so well on customer satisfaction. I'm pumping out a lot of tickets. If I look at inbound contacts handled, I'm doing well. If I look at utilization, I'm doing fine. FCR, doing pretty well there too. But what I really need to focus on here is customer satisfaction. In fact, it looks to me, if I'm the agent that's diagnosing this, like maybe I'm rushing through these tickets because I've got good productivity metrics, but I don't have good customer satisfaction metrics. That's the kind of discussion you want to be able to have with your agents, including these subjective factors, which are important and should not be carved out of the scorecard. But what we've done is we've created an overall indicator of that agent's performance for the month or for the quarter, however long time period is represented by this performance here. And some of our clients increasingly are even going to the point where once a month they post the results for everybody that works in the service desk. You don't actually list their name here. We're not trying to embarrass anybody, but it is motivating in 2 different ways when they see their performance next to everybody else's performance. And that is as follows. If they're way down here at the bottom, they're going to do one of 2 things. They're going to get their act together and try and move up the list so that they're performing better relative to everyone else working in the service desk, or they're going to self-select out. They're going to say, you know what, I'm not doing well. I haven't done well for many months, and I don't see any hope of getting any better. I don't like this job. I don't want this job. I think I'm going to turn in my resignation and leave. You know what? That's not such a bad thing. When people leave for the right reasons, because they don't like the job, they can't do it well, they're unhappy, that's not a bad thing. What you don't want are your top performers leaving, and there are ways to reduce that attrition. But a scorecard like this is a way of showing them, not just a scorecard where they get individual feedback, but also a chart like this that ranks them on a monthly basis. It's a way of communicating to them how they're performing relative to their peers. And as I said, those that have a strong survival instinct are going to move up the list. Those that really are in this for the wrong reasons, that don't have the temperament, the personality to do this kind of thing, are at some point going to have to be honest with themselves and say, you know, the job just is not for me. Once again, not everybody's comfortable with this. But increasingly what we're seeing in the industry is that service desks are implementing individual scorecards and they're posting the performance on a monthly basis in an effort to make sure everybody understands how they're performing relative to everybody else that is delivering service within their organization. So let me wrap up with a few key points and then some suggestions as to what you can do in the coming days, weeks, and months to achieve world-class performance in your support organization. This comic was sent to me by a client more than 10 years ago, and it's even more true today than it was back then. The comic reads, "Delight customers, why can't we satisfy them like we used to?" Well, customer delight is the same as customer enthusiasm. And as I've already explained, customer satisfaction is a losing proposition. Satisfied customers are not loyal. They don't propagate positive word-of-mouth referrals. They don't necessarily want to do business with you, whereas delighted customers and enthusiastic customers do want to do business with you. They propagate positive word-of-mouth referrals, and they're loyal to you. Here's why it matters. Page 67. This is a study MetricNet completed a couple of years ago of large companies worldwide. We gave the users in those companies a survey, and we asked them, in essence, how do you formulate your opinion about corporate IT? In other words, what are the factors that make up your opinion, good, bad, or indifferent, about corporate IT? How do you decide if they're good, bad, or indifferent? It was a multiple choice question. We gave them about 30 choices, which is why if you add up these percentages, they come out to more than 100%. And here's a profound conclusion. Service desk was far and away the single biggest driver of customer satisfaction for all of IT, not for support, not for desktop support, not for help desk, not for service desk, not for field support, but for all of IT. The second biggest driver was desktop support. 47% said that their interactions with desktop support had a lot to do with how they viewed the IT organization overall. Think about this. The vast majority of customer opinion about all of IT is the result of interactions they have with the service desk and or desktop support. Now, we know that the spending on end-user support represents less than 5% of total IT spending. So if you've got an organization that's, say, spending $100 million on IT, chances are that they're spending less than $5 million on support. Or if they're spending $1 billion on IT, chances are they're spending less than $50 million on support. On average, about 4% of spending is directed towards support. That is service desk, desktop, and field support. Yet look at the huge impact these organizations have on customer opinion. Now, if I'm a CIO or Chief Technology Officer, and we have close to 100 of those on our call today, I'm going to look at this, and the light bulb's going to go off, and I'm going to come to the conclusion that I will invest whatever it takes, whatever time, technology, resources, headcount, including my personal time. I'm going to invest whatever it takes to make sure my service desk and my desktop support organization are the best that they can possibly be. Because the reputation of my IT organization, and by proxy, my personal reputation depends on it, and frankly, my job security depends on it. If the service desk is weak, if desktop support is weak, if customer satisfaction is not good for those two activities, those two functions, then all of IT looks bad. All of IT looks weak. And I, Miss or Mr. CIO or CTO, I also look weak, and my job's at risk. This is a tremendously high leverage function, not just in its ability to influence customer satisfaction for all of IT, but also in its ability to minimize total cost of ownership, as I've shown you, and also in its ability to return productivity to end users. We didn't even have time to get into that. But one of the primary value adds for a support organization is that you return productivity to end users. We'll get into that in future webcasts. But this is important, because even though support represents less than 5% of total IT spend, it is the single biggest driver of customer satisfaction with all of IT. As I mentioned, for senior managers, CIOs, CTOs in the organization, I hope that this is a call to action to get you to invest the necessary resources, technology, headcount, dollars, but also your personal time and attention to make sure that these interfaces are world-class. And for those that are on the front lines and are immersed in the day-to-day activities of support, I would ask you to step back from the ground level view, the minutia that goes on day in and day out, the customer complaints, the service levels, and so on, and recognize that you are the gateway to IT for the vast majority of end users. And you have a unique opportunity to shape those end user opinions. Use that opportunity wisely, because your actions are magnified many times over as they reverberate throughout the organization. So let's review what we've learned today. I presented a four-part model for best practices in performance measurement and management for the service desk. We looked at performance measurement, diagnosis, prescription, and implementation. When it comes to measurement, remember, less is more, but you should include a balanced scorecard. This is the thing that boils it all down to a single measure that tells you how you're performing. You should be benchmarking your performance once a year, but make sure you select the right peer group. Once again, we have a white paper on our website that talks about peer group selection. You can use the short list of KPIs defined in this presentation, but you should identify the performance gaps and, most importantly, understand what drives any performance gaps. Then develop an action plan. It's usually pretty obvious what you need to do once you've completed the benchmark, but based on the gap analysis and the best practices we presented here, go after the singles, the low-hanging fruit, the short list. Do what's realistic, but you should expect results. Every action you engage in should have the effect of either reducing cost or improving customer satisfaction. If it doesn't do one or both of those, you're wasting your time. Remember the foundation metrics: customer satisfaction, cost per contact. Here's where the rubber meets the road. Every action you take needs to have a positive effect on one or both of those metrics. It should reduce cost or improve customer satisfaction. And then implement your action plan. But build buy-in from the start. Make sure that you have assigned ownership and accountability. Establish performance goals so that you can monitor your progress over time. But once again, you should expect positive, measurable results. So in summary, performance measurement should be a holistic discipline. Successful measurement goes well beyond tracking and trending your performance, and it produces actionable insights. Your near-term goal should be to improve your performance. Your ultimate goal, it doesn't have to take that long, as I've mentioned several times, should be world-class performance according to the definition I provided much earlier in this presentation. But effective performance measurement and management is the key to becoming world-class. The key to getting results is to take action. Once again, in the words of Nike, just do it. Now there's 5 things that I would recommend in terms of getting started here. They are as follows. First, you can visit our Zen of Support website. There's a number of best practices, white papers, and presentations that you can download there. Once again, zenofsupport.com. You can register for future MetricNet webcasts. Just go to our website. Our next webcast in July is on call center best practices. August, we're going to be talking about customer satisfaction measurement. We're going to talk service desk best practices in September, and so on. We'd like to see you at those webcasts if you would like to sign up. You can schedule a free consulting session with MetricNet. In fact, over the next 24 hours, we're going to be sending out emails to everybody who attended this webcast, and we're going to invite you to attend a brief session with MetricNet. We want to get to know you. We want to learn about your support organizations, and we want to give you an opportunity to ask about this webcast or best practices or anything else that you'd like to discuss related to your support organization. You can download our best practice white papers either at zenofsupport.com or on our main website, metricnet.com. We've got a number of white papers that are free of charge there. And lastly, of course, we would invite as many of you as possible to participate in a MetricNet service desk or help desk benchmark. If you're serious about becoming world-class and want to get there quickly, this benchmark is probably the quickest and easiest way to get there. This benchmark is built on MetricNet's worldwide database of help desk process and performance indicators, and it's the most comprehensive benchmark in the industry. It includes benchmarks of more than 25 key performance indicators, a balanced scorecard, a process maturity assessment, and a roadmap to achieve world-class performance that is very specific and unique to your help desk. Now, a benchmark is just one of the ways in which we can assist you. As I mentioned at the beginning of the webcast, we also do benchmarking for call centers, for desktop support organizations, for field services organizations, and for customer satisfaction. Now, for those of you who have to go, for those who have a few more minutes and want to stay on for the Q&A session, I'll stay on as long as you have questions. And I know we do have some questions that are queued up. But for those who have to exit the webcast at this time, I do want to thank you for attending the session. I hope you found it to be informative and insightful. Please don't forget to complete the brief survey that pops up when you exit the webcast. This is a requirement if you wish to receive a copy of today's presentation. So once again, thank you so much for coming to our webcast. I'm going to go ahead and answer some questions now. I'll try and pick up where I left off. And I'll answer the questions that have been typed in. Okay, a question here. I hear about job satisfaction driving customer satisfaction, but how is that relationship determined? Oh, I'm sorry, I did answer that question. Okay, from Ed, I see a score that says customers are only 39% satisfied while agent is 52.4% satisfied. Doesn't that seem backwards? Customers are only 39.9% satisfied. I'm not sure which page you're talking about, Ed. I'm not recalling those metrics right now or those statistics. If you want to type in another question and clarify that for me, I'd be happy to try and address it for you. Okay, from Justin. When calculating FCR, do you calculate globally across all incidents or only items that qualify for FCR? Example would be hardware request doesn't qualify for FCR, so should it be held against the service desk? Yeah, there are two FCR metrics. One is called net first contact resolution rate. The other is called gross first contact resolution rate. Gross FCR means you take all tickets resolved at level 1 on first contact, and you divide it by all incidents that come into level 1. We don't carve anything out of the denominator. That's the gross FCR. It could be quite low. It might be 20%, 30%, or 40% if you have a lot of hardware break fix and moves, adds, and changes and things like that that come in that can't be resolved at level 1. But net FCR carves out of the denominator those things that can't be resolved at level 1. So if you've got a hardware break fix, if you have a physical move add change, those things get carved out of the denominator if the net FCR calculation. So the numerator stays the same in both of those metrics, gross and net FCR, first contact resolution rate. But for net FCR in the denominator, you exclude those incidents and requests that can't be resolved at level 1. Now, unfortunately, this sometimes invites abuse. We've seen a lot of creative interpretations about what cannot be resolved at level 1. Generally, it boils down to, well, if we didn't do it, it can't be resolved at level 1, and that's really not a good answer. Typically, anything that can be resolved remotely should be resolved remotely, and the things that cannot physically be resolved remotely, like a physical move add change or a hardware break fix, those are the things that get carved out of the denominator. Okay, question from Ed. Why doesn't the balanced scorecard include things like impact of using knowledge properly and recording root cause and solution, avoiding the cost of solving the same problem numerous times? Those are important things to look at from a process and procedure perspective, Ed, but the point of the scorecard is to create a simple mechanism to measure the overall success and performance of the support organization. Now, if you start including some of these intangibles like using knowledge properly, recording a root cause solution, before you know it, you're going to have a scorecard that has 30, 40, 50 metrics in it, and that really defeats the purpose of having the scorecard because it takes away the simplicity of the scorecard. Okay, from Peter, how do you measure agent satisfaction? Peter, we suggest doing either an annual or a semi-annual survey of your agents. If you'd like to get more information on what the survey should look like, how many questions should be in the survey, how to administer the survey, I would encourage you to contact us. The answer is somewhat lengthy, and I do want to get to all of the questions I've got here, but the key thing is this. You need to measure agent satisfaction at least once a year, ideally twice a year, because it is such an important metric, and it does impact so many other metrics on the service desk. But a couple of pointers. It should be a short survey, relatively simple questions. You need to ask about training. You need to ask about career path. You need to ask about coaching. But there needs to be a final question that says, overall, how satisfied are you with your position here in the organization, with your job here in the organization. Typically a scale of 1 to 5. 5 says very satisfied, 1 says very dissatisfied, that kind of thing. But I would encourage you to contact us for more details on that. From Ron, what's the difference between agent utilization and occupancy? There's a huge difference. Occupancy is a measure of being in your seat at the right time. It basically measures ACD time. If you're logged into the ACD, let's say you go to work and you have an 8-hour shift and you're logged into the ACD for 8 hours, your occupancy is 100%. But if you didn't take a single call during those 8 hours, your utilization is 0. So utilization looks at actual customer service delivery time, that is phone in ear time, divided by time at work. Occupancy just measures whether or not you're logged into the ACD. So it's possible to have high occupancy, low utilization. And there's a great deal of confusion about those two metrics in the industry. And we very frequently are told by clients of ours that, well, our occupancy is good. How can our utilization be so low? Well, getting people with their headsets on, sitting in their seats, waiting for calls is not the same thing as taking a call. So you need to address workforce scheduling and make sure that you're not overstaffed here. Okay, does the numerator, this is from Vaibhav, does the numerator and utilization for average handle time a variable or fixed? Well, average handle time is a metric that gets picked up typically by your ACD. Average handle time includes your talk time, your hold time, and your wrap time and your after call work time. That's what goes into average handle time for a live voice call. Then if you have an email or a fax, then it's the amount of time worked for that email or that fax. It's not cycle time. Cycle time would be, you know, how long does it take from the beginning of the ticket until you close the ticket out. We're talking about actual talk time or work time when you're looking at that particular metric. So when it comes to, still trying to, sorry, I lost my screen for a second. The numerator and utilization for AHT, typically the average handle time doesn't vary a whole lot from month to month. It might be 8 minutes one month, it's 7 minutes 40 seconds the next month, and you know, 8 minutes and 10 seconds the next month. It generally doesn't vary much month to month, but it is a proxy for complexity, and the longer the handle time is, typically the more complex your environment is. The industry average handle time is just under 10 minutes. for support organizations worldwide. Those that are down in the 2, 3, 4-minute range are usually doing just password resets and support for desktop applications, and those that go higher than that, including some consumer desks that support consumers with printers and PCs and cell phones and things like that, those handle times can get upwards of 20, 25, even 30 minutes. Okay, another question from Peter. What's your standard for measuring customer satisfaction? I'm not sure what you mean by a standard. I don't know if you mean standard set of questions. I don't know if you mean standard evaluation scale. I don't know if you mean performance levels. I really don't understand the question. So if you could clarify perhaps what you mean by standard for measuring customer satisfaction, I can shed a little bit more light on that question. Okay. Let's move on. Question from Liliana. Is there a scorecard to track tech utilization for desktop support? Yes, there is. Technician utilization at desktop support is measured very much the same way that technician utilization or agent utilization is for the service desk. The difference, however, is that in desktop support you have to include the travel time that it takes an agent to go to and from the site of the user. So it might be walking time, or it might be time in a vehicle to get to the site of the user. If you're in a high-density environment, for example, a high-rise building, the travel time is pretty small. But if you're in a spread-out campus-type environment, the travel time can be fairly significant. So in measuring utilization for desktop support techs, you would do it the same way as we did for service desk agents, but you need to add the travel time to that as well. Okay, for Stephen, any metrics on outsourced service desk cost per call versus in-house? Well, there are two different metrics. If it's outsourced, it's price per call. If it's insourced, it's cost per call. And I'm not sure what you're looking for there, Stephen. Any metrics? Yeah, of course, we've got thousands of metrics, but I'm not sure what you're asking. So if you could clarify your question on insource versus outsource. Typically, from a customer's perspective, you look at price per call. If you've outsourced your service desk, if you have it in-house, you're going to be looking at cost per call. If you're an outsourcer, you're going to look at both your internal cost per call as well as what you charge the customer, which is your price per call. So perhaps you can clarify what it is you're looking for there. Okay, Vibov says an increase in AHT will increase utilization, which is not good. Your logic is incorrect there, Vibov, and here's the reason why. If your AHT goes up, the number of calls you handle goes down. That stands to reason. If you're handling 5-minute calls, you might be able to do 1,000 of them a month. If you're handling 20-minute calls, you might only be able to do 200 of them per month. So as AHT goes up, utilization does not necessarily go up. I disagree with that. I think you're confusing cause and effect here. As AHT goes up, generally that's an indication that the contacts you're handling are a bit more complex. So it does not follow that an increase in AHT is going to drive an increase in utilization. That's not the case at all. Question from Carlos. Shouldn't hours of training be linked to first level resolution too? The answer is yes, it should. We didn't show that correlation, but just as hours of training drives up CR, it does have an impact on first level resolution. In fact, first level and first contact resolution track each other pretty closely. They're very different metrics, but they do track each other pretty closely. Okay, from Preeti, do you have KPIs or scorecards for the entire IT organization, not just the help desk level? Yes, we do, but what it involves, Preeti, is basically having a scorecard for each of the big towers. You'd have one for networking, you'd have one for the for application development, you'd have one for application support. You would have one for the mainframe computing, mid-range computing, desktop computing, the mainframe data center, the NOC, and so on. You have individual scorecards for each of the entities within the IT organization, and then you roll those together into a bigger scorecard. You just weight them in some way. You know, some people do it based on spending, which I don't think is a good way to weight them for all the reasons I mentioned earlier, which is that support is on pound for pound or dollar for dollar a far more important function than any other activity within the IT value chain. But yes, you can absolutely develop a scorecard for the entire organization, and I've just given you a little bit of an outline as to how you might create that. Okay, from Pamela, our utilization rates are typically at or above 70%. What would you recommend first to look at? The first thing I would look at is how you're calculating utilization, because I've never seen a service desk that operates at 75% utilization on a sustainable basis. It sounds to me like you're looking at occupancy or perhaps carving some things out of the denominator, that is number of hours available to work, that you shouldn't be carving out. So 75% is not a sustainable utilization rate. I suspect you're calculating utilization differently than we have calculated it, as I presented a bit earlier in this presentation. From Kathy, hi there, how do you calculate cost per ticket? Okay, You might have joined late. I went through that discussion very early on. If you want to listen to the recording, the webcast, we'll be sending that out to everybody. But I discussed how we calculate cost per ticket. It's a fully loaded cost divided by all contacts, regardless of the channel. Could be chat, could be voice, could be faxing, could be walk-in, etc. So Juan has a question, how do you measure FCR? I already answered that question. There's both gross and net FCR, and I talked about that. From Maddie, the benchmarks on cost seem to focus on help desk only. What about the bigger picture if you are in a full-service ICT service provider? Well, you're still going to have individual cost metrics that you would boil down to the different services that you provide. So, you know, the title of this presentation is Unleashing the Enormous Power of Help Desk KPIs, which is why we focused on help desk and not other services offered. But the same principles that we've gone through here in terms of cost can be applied to, you know, a broader picture, other services in an ICT organization. Okay. From Kathleen, are you using first call resolution and first contact resolution interchangeably, or should they be looked at separately depending on the KPI? They typically are used interchangeably, but they refer to not just live voice calls. They also refer to email. They refer to chat. They refer to faxes. Now, for a chat and a live voice, you know, those are live contacts. And if the user's issue gets resolved on that initial contact, then it's FCR. For something that's faxed in or emailed in, the rule of thumb that the industry seems to be converging upon or towards is that if the user gets resolution within 1 hour from when that email was sent in or when that fax was sent in, that is considered a first contact resolution rate. You know, that's a bit arbitrary, but that seems to be the direction that the industry is taking. So if it's a live voice or live chat contact, you generally know if it was resolved on first contact, and you can indicate such on the ticket. But you need to audit those tickets periodically to make sure that the customer agrees with what has been indicated on the ticket. So if a ticket is marked first contact resolution rate, when you're surveying the customer, there should be a question in the survey that says, was your question or your inquiry resolved on the first contact? And if they say no and the service desk said yes, well, the answer is no, because the customer is everything. And if they say it wasn't resolved on first contact, it wasn't, regardless of whether you think it was or not. So there's a second issue here, which is about auditing and making sure that you're recording first contact resolution rate correctly. And one way to do it is to ask the customer when you do the customer satisfaction surveys. Okay, from Alex, I got a little bit late because of local time and holidays. Sounds like you're having a good time. Is it possible to view the record of this webinar later? The answer is yes. We'll send you a recording. Okay, Kathleen, to create the agent scorecard or the benchmarks created using industry benchmarks or against other agents in the company. It's done against other agents in the company. So you are going to have some agents that score low. You are going to have some that score high. It's a forced curve, and not everybody can be in the 70s, 80s, or 90s. You are going to have some that are below 50%. In fact, half your people are going to be below 50%. So that's the harsh reality of having an agent scorecard, but on balance, what we have found is that the scorecard does drive a level of accountability and responsibility that you don't otherwise get. From Neil, why do you see barriers to taking cost per contact, the call taker level? Because, Neil, when you're trying to drive cost per contact down to an individual, what you have to track is that individual's salary. You got to be looking at the number of contacts they handle. You got to be looking at their handle time, and it's a little bit more difficult to track at an individual level than it is at the organizational level. So our belief is that there's a proxy for cost per contact, which is a productivity metric. You can track their utilization more effectively, or you can track the number of contacts they handle on a monthly basis. That's as good a proxy for cost per contact at an individual level as anything else, and we believe it's easier to get your hands on that. So for the sake of sort of simplicity, if you will, we believe that the number of contacts an agent handles is a good enough productivity metric, and driving down cost per contact to an individual level is probably more work than it's worth. Okay. From Michael, I have a NOC event management service desk. Are there benchmarks for that type of desk? Yes, there are. If you want to be more specific about the benchmark you're looking for, just let me know what it is. From Stephen, currently our service desk runs around 94% first level resolution, and customer sat runs around 90%. With going international and business coming up on the horizon, are there any metrics that deal with customer sat as it relates to outsourcing conversion? I'm not quite sure I understand the question. It sounds like you're asking me if customer satisfaction should be maintained at that level if and when you outsource. And my belief, we are neither pro nor con outsourcing. We don't advocate for either insourcing or outsourcing. We're neutral on that issue. Decisions about outsourcing or insourcing have to be done, using a business case analysis, and it doesn't always boil down to just economics. But if your question, I'm trying to read between the lines here, is should you expect that 90% customer satisfaction will continue with the outsourcer, or will it, decline or increase? The short answer is you should be able to get at least as good customer satisfaction from an outsourcer as you're getting from an internal support desk. And if you're going international, and part of that is to go offshore with an outsourcer or even stay onshore with an outsourcer, you should expect at least a 90% customer satisfaction. Occasionally, there are some growing pains. First 90 days, for example, where customer satisfaction takes a hit as the outsourcer, gains their footing and comes up to speed. That a certain amount of that is to be expected. I don't want to be hard on the outsourcers here, but you should expect and demand a level of customer satisfaction that is at least 90%. Once your outsourcer is up to speed, and I define being up to speed as being 90 days or less. They don't need 6 months. They certainly don't need a year, but you should not be willing to accept a decrease in customer satisfaction except only on a temporary basis, and it shouldn't be much of a decrease in customer satisfaction. And you should demand and expect at least the level of customer satisfaction that you're getting right now. 90% is a pretty good number. The industry average is about 10 percentage points below that. So 90% is a pretty good number. You should expect the same thing from your outsourcer, with the caveat that I just gave you, which is that there's sometimes an adjustment period where this customer sat might suffer temporarily. From Ron, is FCR measured on time? Well, for non-live contacts it is. I just gave the answer to that. For emails and fax-ins, it should be done in an hour. For a live voice or a chat, no, it's not done on time. You could stay on the phone or the chat for 24 hours, and if you get it done before the chat ends or the call ends, and I realize I'm being, that's an extreme example, it's still FCR. So no, it's not done on time for live contact. Okay. From Vibov, if we capture actuals, it will skew the utilization. I don't know what you're referring to, Vibov. Actuals for AHT. Okay, so if we capture actuals, well, what would you capture? I mean, AHT is supposed to be actuals. I'm not sure what you're saying here. If we capture actuals, it will skew the utilization. Again, I disagree. If you look at the calculation for utilization, it looks at the number of contacts handled in the numerator multiplied by the average handle time. As the handle time goes up, the number of contacts goes down. So handle time does not skew utilization. If you have superhuman agents and they're able to handle, as many contacts with a higher handle time than they were able to handle at a lower handle time, then yes, utilization will go up. But that doesn't happen. When handle time goes up, number of contacts goes down. That's the relationship, and it's obvious why that's the relationship. So I'm not following your logic here. I'm missing something, and I don't know quite what it is. But when you say you're capturing actuals, it will skew the utilization. The answer is no, it doesn't, because as handle time goes up, number of contacts goes down, and you would expect utilization to remain roughly the same. That's what we found. Okay, from Valerie, do you have any benchmark data from the industry to share on your website? Yeah, download the white papers, go to Zenith support. There's some benchmarking data in there. Probably not enough to actually do a benchmark on your service desk. That's our business. We do benchmarks day in and day out, so we don't provide data free of charge on our website, except that data that you find in our white papers and the presentations that are available on Zenith support. Okay, from Vibov again, thanks for the webinar. Thank you, Vibov. I appreciate all the good questions. Okay, I've reached the last question. If there are any other questions that you have, please type them in now. I'll stay on for another few seconds in case anybody has another question. Otherwise, I'll wrap up the webcast. Okay, it doesn't look like there are any more questions. So I want to thank all of you once again, particularly those of you. We've still got a couple hundred people that are stayed on to the very end here, and it's been more than 2 hours. So I really appreciate you staying on and listening to the Q&A. Please remember to complete the brief survey that pops up when you exit the webcast. Once again, this is a requirement if you wish to receive a copy of today's presentation. So once again, thanks to all of you. If you have any follow-up questions, you know how to reach us. There's a slide in the presentation for how you can reach MetricNet on our website, on our phone number in the United States, or by sending an email to info@metricnet.com. Thanks once again. Goodbye now.